Greetings. My name is Neelu. I am one of the co-founders of Creative Circle, and my other co-founder, Phil, Portuguese. I'm probably saying his last name incorrectly, but I am currently in Rhode Island. Phil lives in New York, and we have with us Christian, who is a member of Creative Circle. And just to remind you guys about what we are trying to do in Creative Circle, our focus is on open creative thinking and spiritual exploration, which may allow individuals to discover their own sense of experience, truth, and meaning in and for themselves. So in this particular session or video, we want to discuss religion, and we will be providing some subjective and objective viewpoints around religion, but hopefully this will be an interesting discussion. And we are deciding to do this with Creative Circle is because one of the things where our mission under Creative Circle is to open people's minds, promote innovation, promote creative ways of thinking, hopefully bring about new paradigms for the next generation. So, we can certainly do this through exposure of art, psychology. We want to bring in ideas of Eastern and Western culture. And history is also, of course, important as we embark on this. And above all, the top priority is to provide an atmosphere that encourages individuals to question their own preconceptions, assumptions, and values formed or absorbed throughout a lifetime of influences from their various environments. In this way, Creative Circle provides an opportunity for us to reevaluate our conceptions of ourselves and the world in an effort to form and build upon a new and organic philosophy of our own making. All right, so I wanted to present a quick intro of Creative Circle and what we're trying to do here before we got into this topic of religion, because let's be honest, speaking of questioning our own preconceived notions and what's around us, I think we certainly form a lot of our worldviews to religion. I think religion is a powerful operating system, and there's different versions of this operating system that exists in most of human civilization. And there's a lot I can say around this, and of course Christian will be sharing his views as well. But why does religion exist? I certainly think the purpose of religion is, this was an operating system that existed before the scientific method can be derived. And it was a way, an intuitive way for us to make sense of reality, to give us purpose, and to maybe provide an answer for why we exist on this giant blue ball that's floating in the middle of space. And I mean, just from the dysfunction that exists in society and a lot of just unhealthy systems we've created, I think it makes people really have a lot of existential dilemmas in their minds, and go into an existential crisis. And religion saves a lot of us from that, or has in the past. So maybe we can get into what that means for each of us, and then what that means for all of humanity, human civilization. And I'm not necessarily completely shitting on religion. I personally think that we need a new paradigm away from certain religious ideologies, and a lot of people may get offended by that idea, but that's just my personal point of view.
I'm with you.
Yeah, so Christian, what was your background? What religious ideologies did you grow around?
I grew up Catholic.
Yeah.
My Catholic church that I went to in New Jersey was it was on the more liberal side. My family is Puerto Rican and Irish. Like, that's the background that I grew up with.
Okay. And of course, Puerto Rican and Irish
They're both Catholic.
Are both Catholic.
Well,
right?
there's I don't know if most Irish are Catholic. I think they are.
Yeah.
In Ireland, there's a divide between Catholics and Protestants that gets very political and very historical, which it's another story. but my family were Catholics.
Mhm.
And on my dad's side, who's Puerto Rican, they were, yeah, very. My grandmother at least was very strict about being a good uh, you know believer in God and following Catholicism. And even though my parents didn't really care too much about it,
Right.
but that influenced me for a lot of my life because I grew up believing a lot of that stuff, the kind of literal stuff.
Like heaven, hell concept or
Heaven, hell, Adam and Eve, all that type of stuff.
okay.
That's in the Bible.
Yeah. When did you first start questioning these stories?
It's a good question. I don't know when I first started questioning it, but maybe around middle school. That's probably when I started.
How old were you around then?
Probably like 12, like around
Okay.
that age. Maybe even a little earlier, like 11. I
Yeah.
started questioning stuff.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm asking because I feel like it's an assessment to just as a human being, as you mature, as your brain is developing, when does one start having these type of inquiries,
Hmm.
And I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that are either agnostic or atheist. Maybe they grew up in a religious family. I don't know at what point to start questioning and forming those ideas. Yeah.
I think I actually started questioning because my parents would make like a lot of jokes about my grandmother
Mm,
because she was so dogmatic with it.
right. Super religious, you
Yeah,
mean?
and a
Yeah.
lot of that is kind of psychological. The reason that she was,
Your grandmother on your dad's side?
yeah, yeah, a lot of it is psychological. Like she used religion to cope with like a
Right.
lot, a lot of stuff that happens, in her life,
Yeah.
and also if I guess the fear of like, yeah, I guess hell. I guess that's also a something psychological going on there. Why she was so afraid of hell,
Yeah.
and going to heaven.
Yes.
She pictured herself as like a martyr.
Mm.
If anyone's ever watched The Sopranos, like Tony's grandmother is my grandmother was much nicer than Tony's grandmother, but
Mhm.
the whole martyr complex is like similar. I don't know if everyone
Right.
gets that reference. It's a very Sopranos reference.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you started questioning these, I guess, religious ideas you grew up around, did you replace that with another set of ideas for you to navigate through your life? Because there's a reason I say religion is an operating system, right? Because it is an operating system of rules and regulations and narratives that one uses to navigate through life and make certain decisions, right? Either would that be out of fear or, people end up making certain series of decisions because of their fear of God, um, right? But then which way not at the end of the day be that genuine about their own humanity. But yeah, what did you replace religion with, or did you replace it at all? You didn't need to.
I think at first I was just very confused. Yeah, it was very confusing because it sort of laid a foundation of like existence for me, like what
Right.
the point of everything is.
Yeah.
And I think actually one of the things that like kind of we were reading like I was getting into like existential philosophy in high school
Mm-hmm.
around the time I started questioning that stuff. And
Right.
also some of the media I was consuming also influenced my views on religion, like some of the music I listened to,
Yeah.
um, criticizing religion. Um, some of the books also, I was very into like literature
Mm-hmm.
when I was in middle school and high school.
Yeah.
Just read a lot of literature.
Right.
And, you come across criticisms of religion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I had a friend that was very agnostic,
Mm-hmm.
and he gave me some perspective about like life and existence, and it was kind of like he put in a very I don't know if it was like the first time I experienced a sort of perspective.
Right.
Um, just about I don't even think I agree with this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure, but
Yeah.
he said that life is kind of like meaningless, like ultimately.
Mm-hmm. So like in a very nihilistic kind of way.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. But he said that um
Mm-hmm.
like so what? So what if it is?
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually, like I read like I was already kind of reading like philosophers like Sartre and
Mm-hmm.
Nietzsche, and Sartre specifically was a big influence on me. And like he talks about how basically like you can kind of form your own sort of like existence out of the absurdity of, the universe.
Mm-hmm.
That
In your own sort of meaning.
yeah, that the universe is meaningless, but
You can.
I'm kind of simplifying a lot of this stuff, but yeah, you can form your own
Mm-hmm.
sort of meaning. Um, and also Camus is somebody that kind of talks about that too, but he has a slightly different perspective, which is to laugh at the absurdity,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of gives purpose, laughing at it.
Right.
Again, kind of simplifying what he's saying, but
Yeah.
mhm.
Okay.
They're both an acknowledgement of absurdity.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, makes sense. So you turn to philosophy to
Yeah,
help
I
make
guess so.
sense
Yeah,
of the world.
philosophy helps a lot.
Right.
Um, it does help a lot. Yeah,
Okay.
also kind of not taking life too seriously.
Hmm.
Like who knows? Who knows what's? It's something that we just don't know. Like we can't know,
Hmm.
but it's kind of just going for the ride.
Yeah.
We can keep questioning. There's nothing wrong with questioning, but I think I just found meaning in other things that kind of more immediate.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of political issues I'm very concerned with.
Right.
Um, Maybe that occupies a lot of that sort of thinking. Maybe it even gives me meaning. I don't know. It's very
Right.
complex.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. That's interesting. So you went through a period where, yes, of course, that was kind of like your foundation of belief system, Catholic beliefs. But then as you got older and your brain is developing, you started questioning, and of course, you were influenced by your friends around you that
Mhm.
really piqued your interest, and you started reading these different philosophers who made more sense than these religious narratives, and also the fact that your parents were in themselves, I guess, not that religious to begin with,
Yeah.
and they were questioning like your grandma's old ideology.
Mhm.
So that also kind of gave you that pointer, like, wait a minute, my own parents are kind of mocking this, and
Yeah, and they
yeah,
sent they sent me to Sunday school, but they were kind of like still
right,
mocking
because
it.
you still have to. People still do that. They go to church, but they don't actually follow any of the Christian
Mhm.
ideologies. It's just to be part of the community,
Exactly.
right, and to
Mhm.
meet people, be friendly, which
Mhm.
makes sense. Okay, yeah. I had yeah.
I guess religion doesn't always just serve like an existential purpose. It's also,
Mhm.
like you said, like it's a cultural sort of thing as well.
Right.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
At the end of the day, too, I think I kind of religion definitely brings a lot of like evil out in people, a lot of evil in the world. But
Yeah.
also, I have seen it used for like one of my inspirations is it's called liberation theology.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
Especially like in Latin America. It's
Hmm.
been very, very big, and they use Christianity for like kind of a liberatory purpose
Right.
and to fight, uh, to fight the elites and to fight dictators in other countries, and even capitalism. A lot of them are socialists, like
Mhm.
these theologians, and you know, and they were actually like a lot of people were, like murdered, a lot of practitioners.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't think like I would disagree with like the kind of underlying like idea of like Jesus being the savior and all that stuff. But
Hmm.
if you're using it for those purposes, like I feel like that's okay. Like I think that religion isn't like the primary sort of like my opinion at least. It's not the primary root of all evil.
Uh,
I feel like there's larger structures that influence religion in turn. I think a lot of people have it backwards. I think religion is the reason that like governments are corrupt and corporations do evil things or whatever, and people are corrupt. But I think that there's something that's kind of corrupting religion. I think that's kind of the way it functions. I think it's a larger system above religion. If that makes sense.
mm. Yeah, yeah, it does. But I think I don't know, I have like a slightly different perspective around that. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Um,
Well, I mean, that's not to say without a doubt that like there's definitely things in the Bible and in the Quran that are just like just
mhm,
not moral, not the world that we would want to live in.
mhm.
You know,
You mean unfair and
yeah, exactly.
full of
Hmm.
biases,
But the Bible is all about picking and choosing certain.
patriarchal.
It's all about picking and choosing because the Bible is contradictory. right? Like you read the Bible, a lot of it contradicts itself.
Mhm.
So, all these followers are like picking and choosing to begin with. So if you're picking and choosing like, something good out of religion, like
Yeah.
I don't bother people, I think it's fine.
Right. I don't know. It's really complicated. I do think that there's a lot of complexity around it because people derive it in sort of subjective way, which can also go haywire. And that's how it does go haywire. And people have, of course, used the religious narrative to manipulate masses. And I think out of all of this, women have suffered the most. Um, so my story with religion, I grew up kind of in a, I would say so. I grew up in two different countries. I grew up in India and I grew up in New Jersey, in
New
the
Jersey is a
US.
country? Kind of is, right?
New Jersey can be its own country if you think about
Yeah.
it. I feel like every state in the US has its own thing going on in some way,
Kind of,
except for
yeah.
we all speak English, but in a way they like there's slight cultural variations there. But anyway, so I mentioned that because it's important to understand what the game field is of these two different countries that I grew up in. So India is mostly a homogenous population, but it does consist of versatility of religion. So, for example, my mom, she went to a Catholic school, but originally my family follows Islam. And I'm agnostic, but I grew up in that Islamic family. So, but in India, in that, right, the community I'm around and the culture I'm around consists of Christianity, consists of Hinduism, consists of Islam, there's some Judaism there, and then Hinduism breaks down to so many different branches. So there's complexity there as well. But of course, the family you grow up in ends up being kind of like your primary narrative you get exposed to. So, I feel like, and I talk about this in my personal podcast as well, I talk about factory settings, this idea of factory settings. So when you're first, you get birthed into this world, whatever, your mom, whatever, whatever mom you get assigned to. I'm sorry I have to put it that way. That is kind of weird, but yeah, whatever family you get born into, you end up picking up the worldviews, the ideas, the cultural norms, the religious views of that family. That could be an adopted family, that could be your biological family, sure. And then it starts off as simple as that. That's ultimately going to become kind of like your foundational values in the beginning. And then once you go out in the world, depending on where you grew up, like if I grew up in a community like India, I mean, this was literally what 30 years ago. I'm like in my early 30s now. It was, of course, vastly different back then. But, primary religions I was exposed to as a kid, I remember, is Christianity, Islam, of course, for my family, and then also Hinduism. Hinduism is the dominant religion in India. Um, so, yeah, it is. So I grew up around a wide range of perspectives in that sense. And a lot of my neighbors growing up as a kid, I've been in a church. I've talked to my friends. I used to have Christian friends. I used to talk to them. They used to tell me about how they go to Sunday church. I've grown up around many, many of my neighbors who were Hindus, and I used to go to temple with them, right? And this is regardless of, I mean, of course, my parents didn't really think much of it. They're not as orthodox, but in a lot of ways, and my dad was an atheist, my mom was the religious one. But I did grow up being exposed to, even though it was a homogenous population, these very versatile religious views. But yes, dominantly, I was exposed to a lot of kind of Islamic views growing up. So, but I was also really, when I look back at it, I was a little conflicted, or I was a little confused because what I did notice is that it seemed like my dad had a lot more freedom to do what he wanted. And I always noticed how my mom, you know, just being a female and in like an Islamic family, as an adult, when I reflect back at it, she had a lot of restrictions. You know, my dad growing up, for example, drinking alcohol is considered haram, meaning, you know, it's blasphemous, it's wrong. And I actually grew up seeing my dad drink. Yeah, my dad would drink whiskey, drink beer, and you know, of course, my mom let him do it. And, you know, my dad would take me. He would sit with his neighbor and drink, and I just thought it was the strangest thing because my mom's side of the family was so religious, and you know, she was proper, and then my dad was doing this, and of course, I never saw my mom doing any of that. My dad broke a lot of rules. But you know, I recently found out that there's a law in India that apparently allows for men to ask permission from their wives to marry a second wife if they wanted to. So apparently that's a law. I didn't even know that. And so men have this ability, and you know, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about how in Islam, it's very appropriate for a man to have multiple partners or wives, but you know, for a woman, that's not allowed. So there's a lot of like double standards.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, I grew up around like seeing my family, even though from an Islam, I come from an Islamic background. I see my dad just breaking the rules and doing all this stuff, and then there's my mom who's trying to be this proper person, and I already saw like the imbalance of that, the imbalance how my dad could very easily do more of what he wanted. And my mom had to follow these rules or boundaries just surely out of fear that society would condemn her. Because as you know, as a woman, you naturally just you can't do these things just because you're a woman. And that's what in this narrative that runs in Islam. And I'm not necessarily like demonizing like every single person that follows Islam. The thing is, what I notice is some families choose to be progressive despite traditional views. The next generation chooses to be more progressive than the next. Sorry, more progressive than the earlier generation.
Yeah.
In a more modern society, I mean, you just don't want to restrict yourself. So I see that happening, but you know, I also see like the unfairness and like the hypocrisy.
Yeah.
It is a very patriarchal religion. I mean, there's a reason where like guys don't have to wear scarves, but women do. Why is that? And people are gonna get really pissed off. Maybe I say stuff like this, but I mean, do you ever question that? Do you question why are there all these restrictions placed on women and not on men?
I mean, just my personal interpretation is I kind of think I feel like the patriarchy is kind of a larger system,
Yeah.
and in turn that influences religion.
Yes.
I don't think religion is like, you know, the root of the patriarchy. I think I think the patriarchy is more dealt and probably like, I would take a guess, like material conditions that have to do with like, I don't know, you know, like the patriarchy literally means like the ownership of land and the ownership
of women.
well, the ownership of property, like where property gets handed down, it gets handed down through the the uh, the paternal side of the family, and matriarchy is the other way. And along with that sort of like property ownership comes the subjugation of women, since men hold all the property and the private property power. You know, they're able to subjugate women. And you know, like divisions of labor, you know, men work, male work versus like female work, even like in ancient societies. I think all that stuff creates like the patriarchy, and I think that in turn influences religion, and religion is like a reinforcement of those type of things.
Right.
That's my opinion. I don't like these books were written in a time where the patriarchy was already like kind of enforced and created. You know what I mean? So of course they're going to write these books that like just reinforce it even further.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of subjugation, I do remember I grew up with this like story being told of how if a woman is on her period, she was considered impure. So as you know, in the Islamic religion, people pray 5 times a day. So anytime I had my period, I was not allowed to pray or be in the vicinity of anyone praying because I was considered impure. And it goes back to this like old story apparently from the Quran where, like Muhammad is a prophet. He didn't let his wife come. She had to be locked up in a room because she was dirty. All of these things, and it's very specific to women. And there's so much I want to dissect around this, but I mean, I do think that it is absolutely ludicrous that these kind of narratives exist around women. And I connected back to my mom, and she has been thought to suppress her dreams and desires to kind of just stay in this narrative of kind of, and I'm not condoning, someone being a good mother and a good person in the family, but when you are just constantly praised for, oh, you're a good person because you follow all the rules and you do exactly what you've been told, and you're praised for that. And coming back to this idea of course religion provides her the solace of making sense of her existence. And no matter, and she always used to tell me, I used to point out to her, why do you let dad talk to you like that? Why do you why do you let yourself get so much distress? Why do you allow him to treat you that way? And usually the answer is, oh, it's okay, he can do all the bad stuff he wants, God will take care of me. But I just think that that's bullshit. I do think that's bullshit. And I feel like she should stand up for herself. And my dad still does that to this day. And he causes these like ripple effects around other people in the family. And a long time ago, she was fearful of a divorce, and she was fearful of leaving because how society condemns women for divorcing. They get like socially chastised, their reputation gets hurt, and none of those standards are held against men. So she faced all these things, and I guess I definitely grew up around all of this. And then I do feel privileged in a sense to be able to in some way liberate myself away from that. And I guess, to be honest, I was having this conversation with someone around this who was telling me a story of their own trauma they went through in childhood. I mean, in a way, it's why I even considered exploring non-monogamy, because I almost felt like most of the women in my family have always had to follow those standards of, oh yes, be the good girl, follow the rules. And I just wanted to, I guess it was some way to kind of make sense of the dysfunction I saw in my family. And that was my own trauma, and it's maybe me trying to heal that in some aspect and trying to not follow the same oppressive narrative that my mom had lived in. But it also comes down to, if we take a lot, I mean, all of the dogmatic religions, mainstream religions that we have, especially like Christianity, Islam, one thing that we talk about in the creative circle is, you see in these religious narratives, a lot of these narratives are surrounding a male god, right? The focus is always on the male. Oh, the male is the savior, right? And this is the guy is the light, all this stuff. But there's this disconnect of the feminine. The masculine is just I feel like the sole focus, and the feminine represents basically like nature. The feminine represents healing, and peace and harmony, and that has disconnected from mainstream religions. And this kind of goes back to, and that's why I said it's complicated when you started describing this. Liberal Christianity, is that what you called it? What is that called?
Liberation theology.
Liberation theology. Sure, it can be used for good, but a lot of it has been lost. I think that we had some of the older religions, I think, that were more in harmony with nature, that were connected more to nature, and that had that feminine aspect, but that has been corrupted and manipulated. And I think that's how Christianity and Islam were formed.
Let me ask you something. Who manipulates this stuff?
I don't think there's one person to blame if we were to go back into
Well, it's
history, maybe.
usually I would say it's usually states.
Right.
It's usually like states that manipulate the stuff for
Uh,
political reasons.
right, and for
You know, you
power.
could even kind of like I trace like I'm more familiar with Christianity,
Mhm.
and like trace it to like the Roman Empire and early Christianity versus when it became a state religion to the Roman Empire, and
Yeah,
then when it moved to the Byzantine Empire and how it changed over there versus the Holy Roman Empire and all that type of stuff.
yeah,
So I would say it's like that. That's why I kind of reinforce the idea that like there's larger systems in place, like states that kind of like say which direction a religion is going to go and how it's
yeah,
going to subjugate people and say slavery is okay and all this type of stuff.
yeah. And I mean, that was one of the reasons. I mean, I'll be very open and honest about my journey. I'll come back to. I know I kind of jumped into explaining the origins of my factory settings. Was I grew up in an Islamic family, but then truly, to be honest, when I came to the US is when I was forced to question these things. But if I feel like if I, and I'm not, I love my family, I really do. And there's a lot of things we don't agree on, we don't connect on anymore. But, I wouldn't necessarily say that I've been completely blacklisted, but I do know that I'm not as close with them because I just don't connect to a lot of perspectives they do. And I'm also the black sheep because I choose to date a little bit out of culture and the fact that I don't think I've revealed this to my family yet, but I do consider myself queer. And so one thing I noticed, I don't think Islam accepts any type of openly sexual identities. It does not accept queer people.
Mhm.
And I think naturally I felt like it's just something I would never be accepted for. I literally do not know anyone in my family that has ever come out or ever, it just doesn't exist. It just does not exist. So either maybe there's someone there who hasn't quite explored that. Maybe I've been privileged enough to explore that.
Mhm.
But it's something I could never reveal to my family. And
Yeah.
that's a reason why I guess there's a word for people like me, apostates. But I mean, it's not something I chose to follow. It's the family I was born into, and
Mhm.
as a kid, I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
Those are only the ideas I was exposed to. So yeah, I like very similar to you, I guess. In a way, I had friends that were agnostic and atheists, and I did get exposed to some of their ideas and their worldviews. So that had me questioning a lot of things. I even had friends that were, that read the Quran and they would discuss with me. Um, and that's kind of where my journey started. And inquiring about these things. And first, that's when the rebellious Neelu comes out, and that's when my family starts thinking I'm crazy because I'm questioning how dare do I, how dare I question and how dare I break the rules. That's
Mhm.
right. My mom believed in not breaking the rules, so you can say maybe I'm doing her a favor as an extension of her, and I am breaking the rules because if anything, I'm honoring her hard work in bringing me here and me having the privilege to be able to make my own choices and to live the life that I want and not be restricted by just traditional values. And there are there's significance to traditional values. I agree with that, but I do believe that um, each generation we have well, we have the chance to create a new paradigm. And yes, traditional people are going to look at that and say, "Oh wow, you are breaking the rules. Oh wow, you are doing something bad here. How dare you? How dare you accept um, your queerness? Like that's disgusting. How dare you accept other people that are different from you? You shouldn't." I don't know. I'm kind of exaggerating the language I'm using here, but I think it's our duty as the next generation to pave the path for the next set of humans to land on this earth, to have a more progressive, open society, and for to reduce shame and guilt around people just being able to be themselves and not be constrained by traditional chains. I think it's important to set that tone.
Of course, yeah.
You know, and
I mean, a lot of the people that say that you were talking about, like, you know, how dare you challenge stuff, like, a lot of those people are hypocrites because, like, you know, they challenge stuff in their generation.
in some ways they did, some ways they didn't, and that's why they're
At least
in such harmony with their families.
At least I know that in my culture, you know, my American culture, I look at, you know, our generation and the baby boomers that, you know, yell at us for, you know, whatever, for being weird. That's the narrative I hear a lot. But it's like baby boomers were like the '60s hippies generation. Like they started all this.
Yeah, I can't even say there are any hippies in my family. I don't think they even existed.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
a generation isn't as, you know, as it's more diverse than that. Like,
yeah,
of course, back then we also did have conservatives, but like, it's just that the shift in narrative. There definitely were a lot of people from that generation that were very like open minded, and I feel like every generation kind of like, you know, does a little, like, kind of like what you're saying, before they do a little bit more than the past. For the most part, I mean, I don't think it's that simple. I think that
yeah,
there's much more ups and downs like throughout history than, like, you know, linear progress like that.
yeah,
But a lot of times I find, at least in my experience, hypocrisy. You know,
right,
like I said, with the baby boomers, what I'm hearing now
yeah,
about them talking about, you know, millennials being like, that's also another thing. Like, there's a lot of, like, you can go online and like look at this. Like, there's lots of images of like news articles from, you know, different decades talking about how the previous generation was like lazy and all this type of stuff, and what's wrong with them, they're lazy, and it's like then when they get older, they say that about the younger generation.
Do you think we're gonna say that about the next generation?
I mean, I hope not.
We're gonna criticize. I mean, I hope not either. I mean, I don't. I wouldn't
I
say.
hope I don't sell out like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're doing all this work. I mean, we're hopefully we'll come back, listen to this conversation, and maybe be reminded that we should not turn out that way.
Homer Simpson has a famous quote that I always think about. Like the episode is like he's at a rock concert and like he like kind of gets on stage and is trying to be cool with the kids, and then he yells at everyone. He goes, "Never trust anyone that's under 30."
That's funny.
Kind of makes sense to me, because when you get over 30, you start selling out. Except for me.
Of course. Yeah, except for you. But yeah, no, I think we knew that this conversation was going to be pretty subjective, but I think that there's insight, useful, valuable insight that can be gained from our personal stories as well. And you know, kind of where I'm at now, I truly think that does this mean that it's actually going to happen? Probably not, because religion is such a powerful value system in such a huge portion of the population, all, you know, basically across the globe. I mean, I don't know the stats around this. I don't even know if there are that many atheists or agnostics. Maybe that number is increasing, but it still continues to be kind of like this foundation that allows people to wake up every day and, you know, feel purpose and feel like there's something bigger than them. Personally, I mean, I put emphasis on the word agnostic. It doesn't mean that I'm not spiritual. So I've been, you know, just like you, I turn for guidance through philosophy, but also through a lot of older religions, a lot of the more ancient religions. Like I think that I found a lot more value, for example, looking at like paganism and even some aspects of Wicca, sometimes even like studying a little bit of the occult, because it helped me understand the origins of how religion formed, because these are some of the older forms of thinking. And in fact, before religion existed was philosophy, right? The basic, just a very fundamental way of thought. And I think religion, like you said, it's borrows concepts from Platonism. It's like,
Well, Christianity
yeah,
does.
Christianity
Chris-
specifically, yeah.
A lot of our ideas of Christianity. I mean, religion is also, I guess that's kind of a tough, on the way I think about it, I think it's kind of tough to say, like how much like philosophy has influenced religion, because it's, I don't know, I guess since the beginning of time, like people have had some sort of sense of philosophy.
Yeah, I
But-
mean, at the end of the day, coming back to the fact that religion is just a way of making sense of reality.
Yeah.
Like, why do we exist? The why behind all of our existence, making
Mhm.
sense of it. But I think that strain of thought is evolving. And, from studying Jung, this is kind of what he points out. I think he looks at it like basically as the evolution of thought. And, you have this primitive way of, and that's not, and words can be so misleading because of the vocabulary that we use, but if you look at just natural instincts of an animal, like an animal doesn't have a religion. I mean, we are as humans in some form still animals. Animal doesn't have a religion, right? The animal is following its instinct around nature.
They don't have a belief system.
Right, they don't have a belief system.
Only humans, as far as we know, have a belief system.
Right, so that's kind of how we started. But then if you think about it, instincts, that's just connected to nature. It just naturally happens. And then as our brains go and our thought processes evolve, then, we start trying to ask questions like why are we here? And then we create religion. We create the narratives within religion. And then as we continue to progress and as our consciousness evolves, then we have finally gotten to the scientific method. So now science is a way to make sense of reality by observing the universe, by observing galaxies through a telescope, or by observing at a microscopic level through a microscope. That's another way of making sense of reality, which I don't necessarily think should replace spirituality, because, and the reason I say I'm agnostic and spiritual, because I also understand the significance of us being these tiny, tiny, tiny creatures in the vast universe. And we don't have a way to know everything. We are not, we certainly don't have the answers to everything. I think that the basis of knowledge is just so infinite and is so vast that it humbles me, and that's why I integrate my life with spirituality. And what does that mean? Because spirituality, in a lot of ways, is instinctual and it's theoretical. I think spirituality is very close connected to science, even connected to phenomena of like quantum physics and observing that the interconnectedness of things. And a lot of the older religions actually are more closely to this way of thinking. And I think I can think about Buddhism, right? Buddhism is, I don't see it as a religion. It's actually, Buddhism teaches you how to cope with reality.
Well, originally it wasn't supposed to be religion.
Right, exactly.
Didn't mean it for it to be religion. But
precisely.
Yeah.
But we want to turn things into religion because it's just, it helps, right? It's because it is scary at some point, especially because of the dysfunctional society that we live in. We're disconnected to the inner child. We're disconnected to curiosity and joy, right? We get into the stream of things where we have to worry about bills and taxes, or being homeless and not being able to put food on the table. And that point, we go into deep depression. And then we want to seek for something that is powerful enough, like religion. Like philosophy is not enough. We get too nihilistic with that. So I think it makes, maybe the paradigm needs to shift. Maybe a lot of systemic things need to shift for us to evolve and no longer be dependent on religion.
Definitely, yeah.
I think that's the way I see it. I think it's definitely interconnected. Maybe if, it's also Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maybe we're all, I think that some form of pain is inevitable as long as you exist.
Of course.
Right. At some point. And I think that's just a gift of life. You're able to feel pain at all when you're alive. And that just comes with being alive. And I don't know, maybe if things were not so unfair. And I think the scariest thing truly is the idea that maybe in fact, there is nothing out there. maybe this is it, and maybe we are the actual creators of our own reality. And why is that scary? Because then you think about all the awful people out there that are creating these awful situations that are doing injustice. And I think it makes people, I mean, I can understand it's just absolutely deeply disturbing.
Hmm.
To know that there is no higher power, there is no higher power controlling and mediating all this. It's all up to us, and we're responsible.
Hmm.
That's a very scary thing.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I don't know. It almost makes me think about um, you and I are sitting here and having this conversation. I think we are privileged in a way to be able to even be having these conversations and inquire and question these things. But then there is a large portion of the population that religion is such a powerful part of their existence that I don't know. I imagine people going into like a purge scenario. You know the movie The Purge, where everybody just goes on this rally of killing each other
Hmm.
for fun. I almost, I mean, I feel like in some ways it's already happened historically. So, I mean, I can also see how religion can help control that. But I do think that there's a better paradigm we can create for humanity
Of
outside of
course.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just kind of rambled. I apologize. Do you have any?
Um, what I have. Well, you were talking about like uncertainty and just an idea. I was going to bring it up, but I wanted to finish talking. Um, I I read this book a while ago called "You Dice Play God," and it's written by this. I think he's a mathematician or maybe it's a statistician, but it's really something to do with math. He talks about like 5 ages of uncertainty, right? And like when I kind of think it from this like sort of broad perspective. So the first age of uncertainty is religious thinking. That's how we make sense of the world through religion.
Yes.
Um, and then the next one is he talks about I think he mentions science, like the scientific revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that is probability and statistics.
Mm-hmm.
And then he talks about uh, I think then it's quantum physics, and then there's like the age of like big data, right? So all these like sort of different ages create different ideas of uncertainty, and the next age kind of like tries to solve the things that were missing in the previous age. So for
Right.
like a very simple idea is like
It's
what,
the evolution of thought.
yeah, how the scientific method helps solve things that religion couldn't solve, right? And how big data, it solves questions from, I guess, actually, I think after quantum was chaos theory, and then like um, all the things that big data can like potentially like teach us.
Like AI, essentially.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
just, I mean, if you even think about like the scientific method, like in order to like test things, you need to like conduct experiments and under different situations, and data is like that's information right there, and making sense of data is um, very important for understanding things.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, I guess from that sort of like perspective of human history, it's kind of at least it partly serves, again, like religion does different things like culturally. It's also a tool just for power, just
Yeah.
just straight up power. All the evangelicals and like the South that the Bible Belt that just use these people that live large off of preaching, just grifting, just straight up grifters out there. Um, very obvious about their abuse of power.
Yeah.
But then they use something like narratives about the American dream. They integrate it with religion, saying that like, oh, God wants me to have this sort of wealth. God wants me to kind of live the American dream. And then talking, trying to, ideas of like even like Ronald Reagan, who talked about trickle down economics, and
Mm-hmm.
he was like a very religious president that wanted children to um, to pray in school and different things like that.
Right.
So he's, a president integrated this whole economic revolution
Right.
with religion.
Mm-hmm.
This economic revolution has created so much, like, so many problems in our world. You know, the idea that the rich should keep getting richer because it trickles down to people.
Yeah.
It's also in a way like, you know, there's some religious elements in it because of the religious influence and, you know, all these religious figures that, you know, support him, and all these religious voters.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is the part where religion integrates with politics. Yeah.
And just power in general.
There's
Yeah.
just so much to unpack with everything that's going on
Mhm.
with especially with the stuff going on in Gaza.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just real quick, like if you just think
Yeah.
about what's the ultimate source of power, it's like God. You know, if God says something, like
Right.
how are you going to argue about that?
Yeah.
You know, we think the age of kings, anointing kings, because kings were anointed by God. We think that we overthrew that stuff, but like,
Right.
you know, in ways that still influences, you know, way of thinking,
Yeah.
abusing the power of God.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why coming back to describing religious as an operating system, it can be used just for personal gains. And I think that's what a lot of mainstream religion tries to do is indoctrinate people to follow this particular narrative. But it's so complicated because it is such a powerful narrative, and it's just such a deep thing that gets integrated into each one of our identities and our existence and our reality. I don't think we even understand how it just shapes like the most important decisions we make in life, and in a ways that make us miss out on a lot of life itself. You know, because we just create this reality for someone, what is good and bad, or good or bad, and it's just this false subjugation. But I don't know. I understand that it's a complicated thing to talk
Well,
about.
the interesting thing too that I'm thinking about that I don't quite have like a ready answer for it, but we've been talking about like religions with like one God mostly.
Yeah.
But like there's also religions with like many gods, and
Yes.
you know, like, you know, just a question I put out there is like, you know, how does that influence like different narratives and ways of thinking? Why has the idea of one religion, one God, religions with one God, why is that's the most like, you know,
Popular?
popular
Monotheism?
one? Yeah. Why is that the most popular one now? You know, maybe it has something to do with like, you know, like I was talking about the idea of power and, you know, and religions with like lots of gods, usually the gods are fighting each other, you know, they're not always in harmony, but like you have one God and it's just kind of like, you know.
Yeah, not sure. And I think there's different angles people take that with. I think polytheism makes more sense. I also see it as, you know, whatever you want to make sense of your reality. If you really think there's whatever story you want to tell yourself to make yourself get up the next day. I think that we're all extensions of this intelligence system. I mean, you could even see it as, I don't know what a good example I could use is like, you know, I guess I'll come back to using examples about computers, but so, or computers, or even if you think about, okay, so all you gamers out there, if you think about like a gaming system, right? You're in this game and you're in this narrative, and what is creating the game? What are the elements? What is the technology, right? You have elements of both hardware and software creating that reality, creating that narrative. Now, I mean, you can even come back, I guess you can say I'm going the direction of simulation theory here, but let's use that as a parallel. So this is my perspective of what reality is. So let's say that CPU of that console that's creating this game, this narrative for you, maybe that CPU, let's call it God. But ultimately, you, the player that is in that narrative, in that story, you are connected to the power that is coming from that CPU. So in a way, I think that's the analogy I would use to how one may be connected to. I hate the word God. Phil uses this word called the eternal principle. You can say this is kind of like the source. So, you know, in the new spiritual paradigm, we usually describe it in the context of, hey, you are connected to source, or you have the power to change reality because you're connected to a source. You are an extension, you are a co-creator. There's not a thing above you, but you are connected to that very thing that is projecting this reality. Like if you were to look at, using the concept of a whole gaming system. So yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
Do you think that's kind of similar to Sartre, what Sartre says?
What does he say?
Well, he says, like, the world is, I don't know if this is dealing with absurdity at all, but like the world is absurd and you kind of create your own reality out of that absurdity.
Yeah, I do. I actually, I think I understand. I understand his perspective there, and yeah, I do align with that. Yeah, and with that said, I think we can end our discussion here. So stay tuned for more talks like this on the Creative Circle community. We're also having a broadcast on November 19th on Sunday, where we will be doing a discussion with a bigger group. We'll be announcing the topic of that discussion very soon, but thank you for tuning in. And of course, DM us, message us, our social media. I'll be sure to post it. We do have an Instagram page right now, so please message us if you'd like to be part of the community. And we appreciate you tuning in. More conversations to come. And if you would like to collaborate with us also, please let us know. Bye, everyone.